Morena, Morena, tēnā koutou katoa, aloha kākou. Nau mai hoki mai ki Australix 2021. Welcome back to day 2 to our conference in Aotearoa, hosted by Tipukari and Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I see that we have a number of you from all over the world. And hola, Andres, all the way from Santiago in Chile, Jennifer in Hong Kong, of course, Nick from Melbourne. It's great to have you with us. So just to recap, yesterday we had some exciting speakers, our 2 keynotes, of course. The evening session was also well attended, and we had a great presentation from Emeritus Professor Mafela from South Africa. So, you know, we've and our presenters on each stream have been amazing, really. Some very provocative and thought-provoking and engaging. So thank you all for your contribution. And of course, today we have we open our session with another keynote speaker who's very we're attached to her through Tipukari. She hosted one of our facilitators, John. She calls him Wea, which is his real name, his birth name, Patolo, when she worked in the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. We're very grateful that they met and worked together on a language survey, and they've produced a wonderful paper which was published in the journal Documenting and Preserving Languages journal, online journal, edited with the editor from our very own Nick Tilburger from Melbourne. So without further ado, I want to introduce not just a colleague, but a dear friend. We have an umbilical cord between us and her work with her community in Mexico, and with other communities around the world have been impacted by her research. So Gabriela Perez Baez is a fellow of the Center for Language Revitalization in Tipukari. Welcome. This time is yours, and I will help facilitate the questions from the participants at the end of your address. Thank you so much for agreeing to be here, and our love to your son. Our love to your son as well. Thank you, and the time is yours.
I'm not there in person with you all. But thank you for the invitation, and it's wonderful to have this moment to connect with you all. So I'm going to be talking about a couple of Diidxazá dictionaries that I have worked on. So let me dive right into. I will be focusing, first of all, I want to acknowledge that I am presenting today from Kalapuya Ilihi, which is the traditional homelands of the Kalapuya people, the first peoples of the Willamette Valley, whose descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. So this is what I'll be covering today. I'll talk a little bit about the language Diidxazá, and some of the lexicography work that has been done prior to my involvement with the language. And then I'll talk about challenges, collaborations, and contributions since I got involved with the language. And then back to challenges, because there's nothing other but challenges in this work, it seems. So let me introduce you to the language. Diidxazá is also known as Isthmo Zapotec, Juchiteco, Zapoteco de la Planicie Costera, and its ISO code is ZAI. The National Institute for Indigenous Language suggests that there are about 100,000 speakers of the language. I think there's probably more, around 70,000. It sounds like a sizable number of speakers. However, the language is considered to be vulnerable according to the Endangered Languages Catalog, and it's considered to be undergoing accelerated extinction as per the study of Marcial Cerquera, who is a member of the language community. And this is because in the 22 municipalities where the language has traditionally been spoken, only in 2 are children actively speaking it, and in the rest of the communities, speakers are adults and sometimes elders. I'm sorry, let me go back here. I just want to point out that the language is spoken in the south of Mexico, in the state of Oaxaca, and it's spoken in and around Juchitán, so the area more or less marked by this bottom map. Diidxazá is one of myriad Zapotec languages. It is very common to hear the term Zapotec as if it were one language, but it's actually a branch of the otherwise very, very diverse and extensive Oromanguean stock of languages. So here you have the Eastern Oromanguean branch, which breaks into 2 branches, which in turn break into 2 and then again 2. So you have here the sub branch of Zapotec languages. And within that Zapotec branch, there's all sorts of further break. And Diidxazá is within this very small sub branch of Central Zapotec. So it's a very diverse language family, and I'm focusing on this one language, Diidxazá. As many other languages in the Oromanguean family, Diidxazá has contrastive tone. In this particular, Diidxazá itself has 3 tones. Other Zapotec languages have other tonal inventories. And so you have a low tone, for example, in the word ze. Both the vowel has low tone. There's a rising tone, as in ze, which means she or it will drink. And then there's a high tone. So for instance, here you see the high tone ja versus ja, which means clean or clear. There's also contrastive laryngalization. There are 5 cardinal vowels, but each vowel can have one of 3 different phonation types. So it can be a plain vowel, as in ye, or it can be glottalized, as in ye, or it can be rearticulated, as in ze, which I pronounced earlier. And so you can have very nice sets of minimal pairs, as you see here in 7. Gela for horseshoe, getla for depth, and geela for night. There's also stress that can be contrastive, but it is predictable if you know the root structure of the language. I won't go into this too much, but I just want to give you a sense of how stress can create contrast in or can be involved in contrast in this language. So for hanging, you would have nanda, nanda, and for sour, you would have nanda. So this first na, this first syllable is extrametrical, and it's rather reduced. So all of these are features that are really important to mark in Diidxazá. These features have not been documented up until now in the lexicography efforts prior to my involvement with the language. The language there's been a lot of literature, contemporary literature over the last 100 years or so by speakers of the language. There's a practical orthography since 1956. However, as I mentioned, it does not mark tone. It does mark laryngalization. So all those different ways of articulating vowels are documented, but not tone. and not stress, which again, it is predictable, so maybe there's no need to mark it, but it needs to be documented if not marked in the orthographic representation in practical terms. So let's take a look at some of those lexicography efforts. In 1959, Velma Pickett with the Summer Institute of Linguistics produced a vocabulary that was somewhere around 2,000 entries. Eustaquio Jiménez Girón in 1979 also produced a dictionary of about the same length. But and this is an amazing dictionary in handwritten form. You can see a screenshot here in B. And he does mark tone, whereas Velma Pickett did not mark tone with diacritics. There was a reprint of Eustaquio Jiménez Girón in 2000. And there is an online version of that dictionary as well, which you can go and look at yourself if you wish. There's also a curious little dictionary by Britain published in 2003, which has some oddities. It seems to be a translation from Spanish to English. And so you have things like this example, bangu, which comes from the word banco in Spanish. It's a loan word into Diidxazá to mean a stool where you can sit. But banco is polysemous in Spanish. It can mean a stool, or it can mean a bank where you put your money. And they decided to translate it as bank. So there are some significant errors in this one trilingual dictionary. In the late 90s, Terence Kaufman, John Justison, and Roberto Zavala created the project for the documentation of the languages of Mesoamerica, which was intended to document Mesoamerican languages that had an epigraphic tradition in the past. And the idea was to document lexicon that could be used to reconstruct proto-languages and therefore could be used to decipher epigraphic systems of Mesoamerican tradition. So I joined this project in 2003 and that's the point at which I became involved in the lexicographic documentation of Diidxazá. So since then, I did 5 summers with this project that were 9 weeks, working 6 days a week. So it was pretty intense. And I have been working on the dictionary on and off ever since. So I was responsible for bringing the dictionary up to about 10,000 entries, which is where it is now. Now in this dictionary, so now I'm going to show you some screenshots of the Toolbox database, which is where the lexicon and all the data is stored at the moment. So I document systematically all tones. They are documented with somewhat weird characters, so an exclamation mark and a rising, an asterisk for a rising tone. And this is because at the time we started the documentation, we had a lot of issues with cross-platform incompatibility. Also, vowels are documented as a V7 for a glottalized vowel and a double vowel for a rearticulated vowel. So that's where these somewhat oddities come from. But we mark the stress, so this dash will mark extrametrical material as well. And we have an additional lex2 field where we will eventually produce a rendition into the practical orthography from 1956, which will be the headword for public dissemination of the data. There are about 2,000 verbs, and they are documented meticulously with at least 3 inflectional forms: the potential, the habitual, and the completive. And the reason for that, for selecting these 3 forms, is that these are spectral forms that allow us to categorize a particular verb into one of 4 categories. So at this time, about 98% of those 2,000 verbs are categorized for one of these categories, as well as for transitivity. There's tons of derivational forms, and those are as well documented. Some are a ton of participles, which I have focused heavily on this summer. Similitives, versives, pseudo-participles, which are essentially completive forms that are used with some nominal behavior. And of course, very meticulous process documentation. So I document, so one exercise that was done by the project prior to joining the project is that all the lexicon from the previous vocabularies from Eustaquio Jiménez Girón, Vilma Piquet, and the reprint of Eustaquio Jiménez Girón with any changes and improvements were brought into the database. And so whenever a piece of data came from that source, we documented it here. You can see, for instance, this example, Wishana, where we have EJG. This means that this entry was initially documented from Eustaquio Jiménez Girón's dictionary. And later, I document all of the speakers who have provided information for the dictionaries. In this particular case, Victor Cata in 2017 also confirmed data for this particular entry. I also documented meticulously whenever a speaker did not recognize a particular entry. So if there were any discrepancies or variation between speakers. So for example, Wishana is an entry which I'll refer to again towards the end of my presentation. But for now, let me tell you that while it came from Eustaquio Jiménez Girón's dictionary, it was rejected both by José López Cartas, Javier López Cartas, and by Rosaura López Cartas in 2010. However, Victor Cata, who is a writer and historian from Juchitán, confirmed that this is indeed a lexical term from the language, just one that has been going out of use. So all of this is documented whenever it comes up in an entry. We have had a lot of challenges. I've been working on this dictionary again since 2003, so now it's been 18 years. One special challenge was the documentation of plant-related terminology. The dictionary, in addition, there have been about 1,000 entries related to plants. And here's just one entry that, as it stood in 2010, for a tree that I had documented 3 names for, so Yagalagitu, Yaalagitu, and Biagitu. And I had learned that the wood is not very hard, that the bark can be used for medicinal purposes as a tea, that it is called palo mulato in Spanish, but it's also called huachalala, and it's also called copal, and it's also called carnero, and it was a mess. So to make a very long story short, by the time I realized I had such a mess, I was already at the Smithsonian, and I started chatting with Jonathan Amith and a few other colleagues at the botany department, and I learned enough to put together a 3-year project during which we collected plants for a year, and we spent 2 years processing data, processing all of the plant collections. We put together a team of 12 people from the community and from outside. We did 92 field collection days. We collected in 225 locations in the town of La Ventosa, which is just north of Juchitán. We collected over 1,000 herbarium samples, 200 audio clips, 5,000 high-resolution photographs, and a database with over 900 lexical entries. And we were able to refine the data. So that messy screenshot that I showed you before, we now know that in fact we have 5 different lexemes, which correspond to, let's see, 2, 4, 6 different species. So in fact, Yagalagitu is a sort of genus. It's a category of tree. And there's the Kichi type, which is a euphorbiaceae plant. There's a red type, Ginia, which corresponds to 2 different species. There's the copal one. Somebody had told me that it was called copal, even in Diidxazá, the loan word is used, and this is a different Burseraceae species. There's yet a different Burseraceae species, which is the one that is referred to as palo mulato. And with this breakdown by species and by trinomial in the language, we were able to then tease apart all of the properties of the plants. We documented photographically the plant and, of course, botanically. Now, after I mentioned that we did 92 days of field work, and up until day 91, I was still majorly confused by these trees until day 92, when we came upon this particular piece of landscape, and we were able to see 3 different species of the Yagalagitu trees, and finally we were able to tease apart what was what and what properties each tree had, and what names it was to each species was to be given in the dictionary as per the knowledge of the speakers. So that was a huge challenge, but it took us to the publication of a botanical dictionary, which is open access online under the Dictionaria website. So this is now a peer-reviewed dictionary. And all the audio and all the photographs can be consulted here. So of course we could not have done that without collaborations, and these are some of my collaborators in that plants project. We worked with several local experts: Fernando Sanchez Lopez, Rosaura Lopez Cartas, Belma Orozco Trujillo, Reina Lopez Lopez did data entry, Pedro Trujillo Vera assisted Fernando when they went up to the hills. We all did trips every month, but Fernando and Pedro went twice a week throughout an entire year. I worked with 2 fabulous botanists from Mexico, Alberto Javier Reyes Garcia and Kenia Velasco. The photography was done by a professional photographer, Gibran Morales Carranza, and I had the assistance in project management by Kate Ristenberg. So it was a big team. Now, that was the team dedicated to the plants project, but now that, but looking at the fuller dictionary with the 10,000 entries, I have worked to date with over 20 speakers of the language, plus of course assistants and oodles of colleagues who have lent some kind of support one way or another. Especially during the plants project, we were able to solidify community consultations. So we worked with authorities, of course, to get the proper permits to carry out the project. And we worked with the broader community to try to figure out how to best to make the project meaningful to the community. So we did regular presentations about the project to the community to make sure everybody knew about the project. And the members of our team presented on the project, both in the community, regionally in Oaxaca, as well as nationally and internationally. So all of this work, luckily, has led to a lot of contributions towards the documentation of the language and hopefully towards its sustainability. So when we were doing consultations, especially with our team, our project team members, there were very specific desires that our team members and other members of the community wanted to see realized. First of all, they wanted for children to learn to love nature and all that it offers us, and they wanted to make sure that our research would promote that love. For children and adults to have access to pedagogical materials, for the project to also reach adults who care for the children, so that the adults would also know about the project and the knowledge that was being disseminated through this project, and for projects like this to be sustainable long term. So we more or less met those desires, we think. We carried out children's workshops starting in April of 2014 for 3 years. These were workshops that were either monthly or whenever there was a school break, there would be a longer, maybe week-long workshop. They were always free of charge to the children. In these workshops, teachers were able to expand the use of the language into new domains, and children were able to receive direct input and participate in Diidxazá use, even if in their homes they're not using Diidxazá. We devoted a great deal of time and effort to develop quality pedagogical materials. So of course, I already mentioned the dictionary, but even well before the dictionary was out, because the dictionary was published in 2019, and we started the project in 2014. So by 2015, we had produced a number of publications. First, a high quality infographics publication that you see here, that has a selection of plants, 54 plant names, which means 72 species of plants documented in this publication. And this was curated from the larger database by the by the knowledge bearers from our team. So not by me, but by the knowledge bearers. These are bilingual Spanish and Diidxazá full color, as you can see here. There was also, so these were distributed free of charge to schools and to cultural centers and such. In addition, we produced a game version that could be distributed free of charge to families. And another thing we produced was a literacy manual. So despite the fact that there has been a very long-standing literary tradition in Diidxazá, literacy is not widespread in the community. So we felt that if we were producing so many materials with written Diidxazá, that we ought to also support literacy, the acquisition of literacy skills as well. All of these materials are, of course, available open access, free of charge, online. And 2017 was a pretty tough year. There was a massive 8.2 earthquake that hit right, the epicenter was Juchitán. It was incredibly destructive. It was absolutely devastating. And overnight, we went from being researchers to being sisters and brothers and friends and helping with the humanitarian relief. So our project put together 4 community kitchens, coordinated the delivery of food aid from September through the end of, through December 31st. That year, we provided water filtration systems, and we coordinated donations to replace ovens, clay ovens where tortillas are made, which is a staple, a food staple, and provided resistance tarps and did all sorts of things. And certainly the earthquakes derailed our research for a very long time, but this needed to be done. We needed to move away from research and help people at that time. So back to challenges, and I'm starting to near the end of my presentation. So indeed, the earthquakes derailed the workshops, the earthquakes derailed the research we were doing on to produce the Ethnobotanical Dictionary, but eventually we got back into it, and as I mentioned earlier, by 2019 we published the Ethnobotanical Dictionary. And with all this business of not being able to travel comfortably lately or at all, I have also gone back to the main 10,000 entry dictionary, which had been on the back burner for quite some time. So there are legacy and data management issues. The project for the documentation of the languages of Mesoamerica started out by using Shoebox and eventually upgraded in 2004 to Toolbox. So this was the thing to use back then. By the time other software came around, notably Flex, our templates could not be, our data could not be adapted to the Flex format, and I jokingly say that I'm stuck in Toolbox. So the data cannot stay in Toolbox forever. For starters, it's not a relational database of any kind. It's really a text management software. So I'm still working to try to figure out how to streamline this database. One of the main issues that I continue to deal with is the fact that Shoebox did not allow, it had limits on the size of files that it could handle, which led to different files, for example, an ethnomedicinal file, and just a basic A to M file, which eventually had to be merged when we migrated to Toolbox. But this created a ton of duplicates, which I am still editing to this day. So that has been a huge job. Compounds and collocations are a very interesting typological and theoretical problem, one that I love, but if I have gray hair today, it's partly because of this. So it's very difficult. There are no phonological cues to tell us whether a sequence of a verb and a noun or two nouns constitute a compound or not. So we have to test for verbal compounds and collocations. We have syntactic tests, but we're still working on testing for all of the compounds available in the language. Compounding is a hugely important high frequency strategy for lexicon generation. Compositionality associated with compounds, issues related to compositionality are something that I'm just now starting to look into. Let me just show you this example here in 16 to 18. So in 16, you have the word partera, which is a loan word from Spanish being used widely to talk about midwives. But of course, no community can live without midwives or somebody who can deliver babies. So it was odd that the first word that would come up in elicitation sessions would be the loan word. Eventually, I was able to obtain in 2007, although this also came from earlier elicitation and data, the phrase niranda ba'du or nirinaze ba'du, meaning the one who catches the child or the one who grabs the child, to refer to midwife. So this is a phrasal lexeme which under most compositionality recommendations would not become a lexeme in the language. However, it's the only form that is recognizable in Diidxazá by most speakers I have worked with today, aside from the loan word. There are two terms in the dictionary that, which I shared one with you earlier today, bisha'na or wisha'na, which came originally from the dictionary by Eustaquio Jimenez Giron, and it was denied or rejected by at least two speakers. And Victor Cata, again, historian and linguist, was able to confirm and provide data showing that these are indeed Diidxazá lexemes. So what's happening here is that these two lexemes have gone out of use. There's a phrasal lexeme that is right now the link to native wording for the concept of midwife, and then there's a loan. So in a situation like this, we need to hold on to these phrasal lexemes, even if based on compositionality principles, it might be discouraged. let me skip this one slide, and let me just jump into to tell you it's serendipitous that today when I'm presenting about this dictionary, I also finished a huge task for this dictionary, which is coding for grammatical category. So I have now coded well over 9,000 entries for grammatical category. I think it's more like 9,500. And I have 294 that I'm going to be working on with Victor Cata to address some challenges on those entries. But this was a huge task that had been hanging over my shoulders for a very long time. And so, yeah, so slowly but surely, there's been support from many sources to try to move this project forward. And I hope that I can stay steady on the work, continue to collaborate with Victor and with a few other friends in Juchitán and La Ventosa so that we can have a publishable manuscript by 2024, 2025. And so with that, here are a few references of some of the works that I have mentioned. And I just want to say Shkishepelatu, Tena Kotou, gracias, and thank you all for your attention. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Gabriela, for your very detailed presentation on this amazing community. Thank you. And I'm now receiving questions. So can you please use the box in for type, which Mark has said, please type your questions in the pod. They will remain private and available to presenters who will address them as appropriate. So it's open now. I really am looking forward to receiving questions from any participants and or comments, really. While we're waiting, Gabriela, I just wanted to probably also say that you can't see me because my webcam keeps spinning around and won't let won't pick me up. So it's a substitute as my photograph. So each day we try, or each afternoon, morning and afternoon, but it goes for my other meetings. So it's just something that's just peculiar. So that's why participants, you can't see me, but I'm trying to get my webcam to stop circling. Okay, so are there any questions or comments, please, from the floor at all?
Yeah, so I'm seeing two questions, which I'm happy to address. So thank you, Nick, for your kind words. So there is a ton of interest for a dictionary for a number of reasons. Again, because there's a lot of literature being produced, and I think the more literature that's being produced, the more interest is being generated across the community, outside the writers' circles in the community, to be more proficient at reading and writing. And there's no go-to reference for that. So there's a lot of interest. There's also a lot of intellectual capital within the community, as in addition to the writers. There's Victor Cata has a master's degree in linguistics, and there are two another young man from Tehuantepec who just received his master's degree in linguistics and applied linguistics, and a young man from Salina Cruz who just received his PhD about a year and a half ago. And so together we could turn this already amazing data set into something much greater. The young man who got his PhD, he has been working on variation, and that's something that I have only sparsely documented. So once we have the dictionary as a shell, he could bring in a lot of his data to supplement and to represent the variation that is that exists in the region of the Diidxazá language. So yeah, and then out of this dictionary, you could, make selections to produce specialized dictionaries. So of course, the first specialized dictionary was the Ethnobotanical Dictionary, but a children's version would be amazing so that it can be disseminated across schools. So yeah, that's definitely I guess that's one of the reasons I'm so eager to get a publishable manuscript. I used to say to be done with a dictionary, which is of course an impossibility, but now I really want to have something that is of quality and that can be then manipulated in a number of ways to serve specific community needs.
We have another question.
Rachel, thank you for
amazing.
Yeah, so
amazing
ahead,
work.
Tanya.
Thanks for sharing this. I wonder if funding for this work is a challenge. That's a question from Rachel.
Yes, I mean, I have been very fortunate. So all of the work for the Ethnobotanical Dictionary was provided by the Smithsonian Institution through various internal channels. So it was a lot of funding, and it was really, we could not have done it otherwise. It has been a challenge to find. So for example, this summer I was able to get summer research stipends through the University of Oregon so that I could devote full-time attention to the grammatical coding. And so I'm always having to do kind of modules of the dictionary and finding funding for that. Sometimes I can't have dedicated funding for a particular task, so I'm always saving research funds on the side so that whenever I'm ready to work on a particular task, and if I need to compensate collaborators, or if I need to hire, for example, the issue of the duplicates require a lot of programming, so I needed funding for that, and that was funding that I had to where I had discretionary funds, fortunately, to do it. So far it's been good. I definitely cannot complain. I also, I guess, feel the pressure to publish this because there has been a great deal of support for it, and it's time for the dictionary to be out and available.
Last question here I have at the moment is from Peter. Kia ora, hola. Could you speak about any media activities in this language community, such as radio, television, or the internet?
Sure. Well, I do confess that I'm not very involved in mass media projects, but there are projects, not much in the way of television, but radio. There's radio programming that has been going on for quite some time, internally within the there are stations run by community members that have been going on for a long time. On the internet, there's a number of projects and sites. I mentioned the Talking Dictionary, that is an online adaptation of Eustaquio Jiménez Girón's dictionary that's available online. And again, that was also an internal community-led project. There are also a couple of apps out available for Android, I believe, only, but that were also produced by community members as a way to promote using and learning the language.
Thank you so much, Gabriela, for an insightful and engaging presentation. And I hope you can join for this morning's presentations that are about to commence. We're very lucky to have you. We know you're so busy, and this proves it. You're constantly engaged in research. So it was a no-brainer. So thank you again. And over to you now, Mark, to transition us into our breakout rooms.